Hey everyone, welcome to Building Your Strategy, Planning for the Worst and Hoping for the Best. I want to welcome today for 5 people from across the industry. We've got a promoter, we've got an agent, we've got a PR, we've got a product manager, and we've got a label owner. You're a label owner, aren't you, Ash?
Yeah, I do other stuff. I manage some artists as well.
Yeah,
Shows
across the board. So first and foremost, it'd be great to get you guys to introduce yourself. Ash, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Ash. I'm the managing director of Killing Moon. We are a record label, an artist management company. I definitely want to keep thinking of us as a live promoter as well when that resumes in the hopefully not too distant future. And I guess I do a lot in artist development in general. So yeah, that's me.
James?
Sorry, me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Broke out a bit there. Yeah, my name's James. I run a small music PR company called Mystic Sons. I manage a couple of artists as well. And yeah, not so affected as some of my friends in the live market, which I'm sure we're going to talk about with COVID, but obviously we've all had different levels of affection to do with this situation. So yeah, it's going to be fun talking about it.
And Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob, a booking agent at the Empire Agency, which is a boutique agency based in the US and UK. Both markets have been heavily affected this year. Pretty much zero work from March. So it's been an interesting time, but staying positive with it and building for a strong 2021 at the moment.
Chris?
I'm Chris. I head up live at Scruff we cover predominantly live promotions, but I also work as a booking agent and I handle our festival productions. And as with Rob, since March, not an awful lot's happened.
And Anika?
Hello, I'm Anika and I work at a record label, Bella Union, and I do A&R and project managing. And I've been there 10 years now, so it's my anniversary this month actually.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
And I'm Ellie Giles. I'm a music manager. I've been managing for about 8 years now. I used to be A&R and I've also been a promoter. I want to start off really with how you guys have been affected by it. I think that probably kind of starts the ball rolling. So going back to Anika, how have you been affected, like from the label point of view and like releasing records? And what has the market? How has the market changed in the last in the last 6 months?
Sure, yeah. I mean, stating the obvious, obviously, there's no live side to what we've been doing the past 6 months, but in release-wise, we haven't really changed anything that we already had scheduled. We didn't put back any releases. We just continued with what we had in our diaries before COVID. In terms of long-term effects of how this is going to affect us as an entity of the label, it's hard to say how long this is all going to last, but currently, I think our philosophy is to just keep on doing what we've always been doing. When we're looking ahead to 2021, there are some releases that were already scheduled for 2021 that we had a vision of touring happening in March, February, and now even with uncertainty on whether that's happening, it might be that those releases move, particularly for bigger artists who were going to be guaranteed to be touring the world and entering so many different markets which are going to have their own restrictions and guidelines, and just putting together a tour for February, March at the moment seems like it could easily not happen. So those ones that haven't been scheduled yet might move back, but as of yet we've just continued as we've been doing.
Cool. And like in regards to like say you've put in a marketing plan for something, and say that marketing plan has been you're expecting to sell so many records or do certain amount of things, like, or do as many streams as you possibly can. What does that look like? Has that changed? Is that kind of got smaller? As in, you expect to sell 5,000 records, you only sold 1,000 records.
I mean, honestly, the outlook hasn't been as gloomy as you might have expected it to be. I think at the best of times, it's extremely unpredictable what's going to happen with any release. And there's so many different things affecting it that you can always expect to sell a certain amount and always end up disappointed, or always end up really surprised and happy. And for some artists, we've seen them sell as many records as we would have hoped them to sell. And for others, newer artists that we're introducing to the market, who knows how this affected things versus if we had just released in a regular time and perhaps it just didn't stick the way that you thought the first time round. But as a label, we tend to have a more long-term philosophy anyway, and we're not really in it for the immediate moment. We want to build relationships and develop towards the future. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, fair, makes sense. Rob?
How it's affected on the agency side has been it's been fairly catastrophic, to put it lightly. I think when March kicked off, I first started to realise that something pretty bad was going to happen by getting a phone call from one of my tour managers. They were in Spain at the time. I think it was Barcelona. There was a show, and our artist was in sound check and just told that the venue was closing. So that obviously started setting off a lot of alarm bells for the touring artists that were, in different countries, and they were scattered around. And since then, March and April was all about rescheduling. A lot of it we rescheduled to August and September 2020, thinking that we would be okay by now. And this was just a bad case of the flu. Obviously, that was not the case. So we then spent summer period really just moving things into next year as far back as we can. I think it's going to be April 2021. We see the return of full cap performances and venues. Not sure on the sizes of that yet, but it's it's tough. It's all educated guesses that everyone's trying to make right now because it's so uncertain. And I think it's going to be domestic touring that we're going to come back to first. I think international touring is going to be a long way off. You've got no two countries doing the same thing right now. So that, again, for someone planning to do live shows, it's especially touring, is incredibly difficult. And festivals themselves that's just another kind of headache right now to plan and build towards.
Cool.
But it's not impossible. We're seeing good steps come back now. Venues are starting to reopen. I'm based in Bristol. We have a venue called Dhillon's. They're doing, I think they're doing shows 3 days a week at the moment with solo, duo, acoustic acts, social distance, seated, and each one's selling out right now. So it's, we are moving in the right direction.
Great. And Chris?
Yeah, similar to Rob, really. We got to March, April, and then spent those 2 months moving everything into the autumn. I've since had to do everything again. And yeah, the biggest difficulty at the moment, I suppose, is just all this work's going in, all this time and effort's going into moving these shows and, starting to re-promote them. And there's no certainty they're going to go ahead. So it's kind of deciding whether to commit a load of resource now to really give everything a huge push, or to sort of wait and see how things plan out. I suppose another thing, as Rob mentioned, is for some of our artists that I'm booking for, we're looking at trying to plan some European stuff for next year. And obviously with no country having the same rules, it's very difficult to figure out what routing is going to make sense and even be possible. So yeah, all we're doing at the moment is pushing everything we can into next year, and just keeping an eye on things and seeing how things progress. But it's kind of just, there's no official guidance, there's no certainty when we'll be back. It's just a case of keeping in communication with everyone else in the industry and hoping that if enough of us are doing the same thing, we must be onto something.
Cool. And Atch?
Yeah, I remember that day very sort of vividly. So looking at it from several different perspectives, from an artist management perspective, I remember calling up my entire roster and saying to them, if you've got parents that have money, can you give them a call now? Because we have absolutely no fucking idea how long this is going to last or how bad it's going to get. About, in terms of Killing Moon Live, that represents about 5% of our overall business. So the way that that side of our business was configured was to pass the entire financial liability of our live business onto the venues themselves, and that's why we do so many club nights, free entry sort of events. We were actually preparing to scale up this year through a deal that we had done with Dice, and started to make some sort of like headway in that sense. But obviously, when lockdown started, that made it a little bit more difficult to proceed on that basis. So really, in terms of like a record label perspective, it depends how your label is actually configured. A lot of independent labels take receipt of performance rights, with a large source of income on that basis comes from live performance itself. So a lot of the financial projections as to how an artist is going to recoup on a particular campaign is calculated on that basis of having a live plot. So what we've seen is, with the near obliteration of live in the traditional sense, especially in the monetized sense, we found a rather soft underbelly to the music industry in general, in that it hasn't actually been configured to exist without it, or at least an artist's career has not been configured to exist without it. But, you know, certainly on the more like positive side, I guess Killing Moon was always designed to run in quite a lean kind of way. So, you know, going back to like working from our respective flats was not so much of a problem, because the staff do that anyway. So there wasn't so much of a disruption in workflow in that sense. The immediate priority was to work out how we help our venue partners on the live side of things. So we couldn't be seen to shut off everything too quickly, otherwise we're being seen to abandon our venue partners, and I'm pretty sure they'll remember that in, you know, 2021 or 2022 when things start to resume back to normal. So yeah, again, also on like the more positive side of things, you know, I'm a director at AIM, and we've converted a large part of our working capital into a rescue fund to assist any freelancer or independent contractor working in the music industry. And I'm pleased to say this has actually helped a lot of people just survive this very uncertain period. And I think that's what, you know, has really sort of like taken priorities for me, is sort of like personal survival over and above creative expression. I realise that preservation of culture is very important, especially at these uncertain times, but I've mainly been focused on trying to keep people alive, you know, in that sort of sense. So yeah, that's largely been my story for like the last 6 months.
And James?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's similar to what Anika was saying. I mean, we're not so directly involved in the live market, but obviously, like, we all are in some degree the next steps down the line. I mean, I think in terms of like press and radio stuff, we've still had a lot of releases, which is great. And it was a bit, I remember back in March, no one was really sure would people continue to release. I remember, you know, thinking the whole thing was going to be shut down pretty quick on our side, and we weren't quite sure how it was going to go on. But I think a lot of people had, especially a lot of the independents, had a real attitude where, I think Anika said this, like, let's just carry on as we had and do as best the job as we can, and not try to change plans that didn't drastically need changing. So there was still a lot of releases this spring. The downsides, you know, were anyone with a real live plot was postponed and pushed back, which is understandable, which often meant you sort of bigger artists and bigger albums didn't release, and a lot of them still haven't scheduled the stuff that was set for release late spring. They haven't rescheduled it yet, which is understandable. I think the biggest problem in press has been the print market. I mean, we all probably saw Q magazine died a few weeks back. I mean, I'm not sure if that was actually directly to do with COVID, but I think it was the final nail in the coffin. I know a lot of other publications have got crowdfunders out, as have, you know, live music venues, in terms of trying to keep afloat. So when we've been, you know, working artists on a print basis, that's been the biggest complication. Is there really a strong monthly print magazine market at the moment? And this is going back a couple of months. I know some of it's recovering now, but then on the other side, I think there's been some real, especially for new upcoming artists, that there has been a space in the market that you've probably never seen before, and I haven't in my career, in like March, April, May, June, where like there's there's not as a cluster of releases of all the bigger majors and bigger indies that were sort of reliant on the live plot to release. So that there has been some wins for some smaller artists, which has been a real, I would call it a positive. It's hard to look at real positives the last few months, but we're scraping a little bit, but it's been something to take away from it at least.
Great. So understanding everything, really, overall, everyone's been really affected by this. And so how have you looked at kind of having, working through it and finding ways forward? And have you got any examples and working examples of what you've done and how you've tried to mitigate the certain circumstances and found like a positive way forward? Chris, I know that you work at Scruff of the Neck, and I know you've got the live side, but what have you been doing as a bigger company? Is there any examples that you can bring to the table?
Of course, yeah. Well, I think obviously with a lot of tours for a lot of our artists being pushed right through to next year, we are left with this gap where we need to fill it with something, and we need to keep content coming. For some of our artists, that's just meant putting more time into writing, recording, getting everything ready on that front, especially now they can get back in the studio and start getting some music down. I think for others, first time as long as I can remember, there's that little bit of breathing room where everything's not happening at 100 mile an hour, and you can actually take a step back and look at the strategy as a whole and think, where have we got gaps here? Where can we try something new? So with a lot of our artists, because we've already got tickets in the market, we've not gone down the monetized live stream kind of route, but we are exploring doing stuff with like Twitch and Amazon Music, where we're doing completely free to access stuff, which is going to then hopefully elevate the artist's perception and help us push the live dates if and when they come back. But yeah, that's kind of the approach we've taken, very much pulling together and delivering the best amount of high quality content we can, but that's free to access to the artist, and that's purely because for those artists we have a lot of tickets in the market. For other acts, I think the main thing is for grassroots artists, it's quite hard to monetize a live stream and make it worthwhile, just because the costs of delivering that live stream are so high. So I think for those sort of artists that are kind of caught in the middle, the best route is to find that sponsorship and that funding to deliver a high quality, free to access event, and use that to push other elements of the artist's income streams, whether that be driving merch sales, driving ticket sales, things like that.
It's really interesting. Your thoughts from the company point is that live streaming will affect your live business, and it's something that I've been debating a lot, because I'm on the MMF board, which is the Music Managers Forum board, and we've been talking about it a lot as a group of managers of what that looks like and how that affects each other. And whether they're symbiotic or whether they eat each other. And I think what we're finding is actually that from our point of view is that we are thinking that actually live streaming could actually give extra value to selling tickets, because some people who might have not actually seen you before in a different market, or have been, in a different city and have lived in a city that haven't toured at before, you can kind of engage them and move forward. Has anyone done anything on the live streaming basis, both on a paid and a non-paid, and what have been the differences between the two? That's open to anyone.
Yeah, I've done. I've got a few examples. I suppose like you can look at sort of like the more overtly promotional side of things. There's been a lot of brands. I've done more work with more brands on the live streaming space in the last 6 months than I have like the last 5 years. It's almost as if content is not just king, it's God now, and that's largely because that's the only avenue available for developing artists in particular to actually promote themselves in that way. So I remember Dork Mag had a really good virtual festival. I believe that was not monetized though, and that was largely an activity to supplant the absence of other festivals that were sort of that were attenuated with that brand. We had a little bit of a hand in Red Bull's virtual festival, which I guess, you know, again, by virtue of like, you know, having the backing of a brand like that, you know, the monetization, it kind of becomes like self-explanatory in that sort of way. A lot of these brands were using it for charitable fundraisers as well. So, you know, again, I find it quite ironic while the music industry is suffering the absolute brunt of the economic sort of downturn of all of this, that it still decides to champion monetization in favor of other causes, which I think is, you know, amazing in itself. Perry Farrell did a virtual version of Lollapalooza, which I'm not sure if that was monetized or not, but it did. Oh no, it was part monetized and part unmonetized. So people could unlock particular content within the thing, exclusive interviews, exclusive performances. There were 2 songs by the original lineup of Jane's Addiction, for example. And I think that there was a paywall to sort of access that kind of stuff. So there is, you know, there seems to be a development of like online content specifically for the superfan. And for me, that's the cutoff point. It's the very basics of like having a fan base. If you've got one, then you can sell shit to them. If you don't have one yet and you're trying to still climb that ladder, then this becomes a little bit more problematic. But then again, inferably, your exposure to this will just be way less. It's as if like you're not making money, but you're certainly not losing it at the same time. So it's that middle tier that I feel have been more overtly affected by all of this. And that's the grey area right now, as we're sort of turning our attentions to what happens when this thing switches back on. The pursuit of finding a solution in the monetized streaming space for live becomes it seems a lot less imperative in that way if it's just a waiting game. But I have heard from, you know, certain people that I would otherwise deem in the know that perhaps it is live going through its Napster moment. You know, like live traditionally has never really had to embrace like the online space in quite the same way as Masters has, for example, because it wasn't necessarily affected in this way and none of us saw this coming. So it's an interesting point, like, do we need to adapt now? Or are we just playing a waiting game? And that's sort of like the bit where I'm undecided right now.
It's really interesting. I think, you know, I watched the Biffy Clyro live stream the other day. Actually, one of my guys had done the sound for it. And they spent a lot of money on that stream, a lot of money. But it was incredible how good it was. And it sounded fucking brilliant. And it looked fucking brilliant. And you know, they've had a #1 album out of it. And I do think, actually, it showcased their new music very, very well. But the problem is that, as both you and Chris have talked about, is that it's the barrier to the money to get the high production values out there and make that happen. Anika, you've had a real success story through this all, really, with Tim Burgess. Could you tell us a little bit about what the strategy was there?
Yeah, so Tim's album came out in May, and obviously he had a lot of touring lined up that was all cancelled. He was going to do Glastonbury, he was touring internationally, South by Southwest, all of this was cancelled for him. But what he was doing throughout this whole time was his Twitter listening parties, which I feel like, just like on a moral level, like raising morale.
And where did that come from originally? Because I'm just really fascinated at where the starting point was. Did that come from Tim, or?
It came from Tim, and he's been doing it for years. And it just came from wanting to listen to an album with the person that created the album and hear what other people thought. And it's been keeping him so busy at the moment. And I feel like in terms of morale, it was just like a really beautiful thing of everyone coming together to share in records that they find really exciting and hear what other people think is exciting about them. And it sort of just hit the right chord, and we got so much press just around the Twitter listening parties, and so much album press in general. Internationally, we were seeing pieces in markets that he had never received press. And he's just a brilliant person to work with. He was up for everything that we sent his way, and we did a few different live streams either through Instagram or Facebook. I don't think we did anything that was monetized from my memory, but everything we sent his way, he did it. And he just kept busy through this time, and he's just been doing the Twitter listening parties, staying really visible. We haven't announced it yet, but we'll be doing an EP later in the year. And I think with Tim, it never really felt like, it just felt like this is now what we're doing. Then like he was someone that was able to adapt to this situation just based on his personality and who he is. And I think that's a thing to remember as well, that not all artists want to be jumping on a live stream. It doesn't suit everybody to be performing in their house or wherever it is, like with no audience there. Not everybody wants to do that. And also in terms of aesthetics, yeah, you need money to make it look good. And if you're an artist that's very conscious of your aesthetic branding, you don't want to put something online that is going to be less than what you think is good quality. And I think that's something I tend to encourage with all of our artists is quality over quantity. I think doing things for the sake of doing things, and I think that would be very easy at this time to see all of this live streaming happening and to just jump on the bandwagon because that's what everyone's doing. But yeah, I'm a big fan of quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, the quality side of things. So I think what I found at the beginning of lockdown was we had a lot of people just streaming for the sake of streaming, and some of it didn't really lend itself to the aesthetic or lend itself to themselves, to them as what they would normally create. And I wonder if there's a hole there that we need to look at, like Arts Council, and speak to them and say, look, there is a massive space where we've got artists who might want to do something really aesthetically interesting and pleasing, and it might just not be a live stream, but it might be something similar to that. And can we get the funds to do that? Because I think that going forward, that's vital that we have the access to that. And going back to Chris, Chris, have you had anyone approach you and say, hey, can we do a live stream? Will you pay for it as a promoter? And I wonder if there has been, I found that when I've talked to promoters, they haven't really been interested in spending money on a live stream, which I felt a little bit naive, because I actually think you could get data which could then help sell more tickets. What have you found, and what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, from my side of things, I've had a few artists come to me and ask about live streams, but generally, those who have management, they'll take care of it themselves, because it makes much more sense for them to own it in its entirety and monetize that and in their own right. I think the sort of the main bits really is sort of making sure that for at least for our artists, making sure that it's right for them. As Anika mentioned, like we've got artists where very much their live performance is about the people in the room with them and interacting with that. And if the artists don't feel completely comfortable with it and completely sort of committed to the performance, I think I worry that for those artists it might actually be damaging to what their existing fans have as memories of their live performances. I think if you can get it right and the artists are 100% in on it, and you can feel that and you can see that when you're watching the performance, then it makes sense. But for some of our artists, like they've sort of come to us and said, "Do you think we should be doing it?" And I've just kind of given them the answer of, if it doesn't feel like you, don't do it, because I just think the only way they work is if you're watching it and you know that artist is enjoying it as much as they'd enjoy, or as close to as much as they'd enjoy a live show. And if that's not the case, I don't think it really sort of adds much value for a fan experience. But that's kind of just my take on it.
It's really interesting, because I think that look at the Biffy one. It was like watching a video. It was watching a really, really well, but sonically fucking brilliant. But it was lots of different, like they set up, I think 4 or 5 different ways. So there's one in the dressing room, one in the main body of the Better-O-Lands in Glasgow, and one on the stage. So it was different setups. So it never kept you interested without ever get bored. And I wonder if that we have to look at it from on an audio visual side of things rather than a live point of view, and how we push things forward on an audio visual point of view. And I think that's been our kind of I think that's something that we like what Tim's done with Twitter, and kind of using the resource of something like Twitter and gone, right, okay, let's push that forward. I think maybe that's what we need to look at as an industry. Start going, okay, well, what do we have and what can we do? I really liked that Queen, Phil Collins. The two guys were listening to Phil Collins or Genesis, I can't remember what it was, and they were just like, ran. And I just thought, yeah, like, you know what, if you had the right artist, you could probably do that, like get a bunch of people and do them videos and use it on a viral level. But on James, what have you had example wise if you had anything that's been really positive and done anything very differently or changed the way that you're working over the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I've had to go a lot more digital with everything and take away the physical press side of things. I mean, not that it's completely gone, but it's just definitely, the market did capsize a little bit. I mean, you know, just what we're talking about here is for artists, we haven't got a live gig to play, or we haven't got any festivals to play. So the key question is, how are you going to reach a new audience via digital instead of via being in a venue with someone? And you know, with all due respect to Biffy Clyro, you know, they put a live stream on, everyone tunes in. I bet I didn't watch it, but I'm not surprised. It was incredible because it's Biffy Clyro and you expect them to do a really good job with this funding and whatnot they've got, and they've already got, you know, an audience for it. So what, you know, when you've got artist A that, you know, is releasing their first EP in May 2020, it's not the best time to do that, but there's going to have been quite a lot of them, and there's quite a few that we worked that were dropping early singles around then. So how can we get these guys onto a new audience? And I think, you know, not just using like your own social medias, but we're looking at what we can do in terms of Instagram or social media takeovers from more established brands or magazines or blogs or publications that already have an audience inbuilt. So can we do a live stream on someone else's Instagram? Or, I mean, what we started pitching, and we're still doing it, to be fair, and especially with the North American side of things that we do, especially the international tastemakers, we're still pitching ideas and trying to facilitate stuff out there, because I don't think, well, we're not out of the woods here, and I don't think they'll be out of the woods in terms of COVID for quite a long time. So we're trying to say, right, well, the live stream thing was great, and, you know, there was a lot of good stuff, especially back in, I'd say, like April and May time. I do think it's tailored off a little bit since then, but, you know, even on publications, I know like E-Milk did a lot of stuff. Dork, obviously, I think Aku said that, didn't you? Did the home festivals, which was really great. Even like Colours in Germany did like a homebred series. I don't know if anyone saw, but they were doing like 10 new artists a week every Tuesday, which for Colours, pitching for Colours over the last few years, it's notoriously difficult to get anything going there. So to actually have an opportunity to have 10 plus artists a week do a live stream on their platform, it wasn't the same exposure as doing a full video of them, but it was pretty great, and it opened up more doors and more possibilities than you'd usually have. So they were all awesome, I think. But then what we're trying to do now a bit more is right, let's, you know, live stream, and this comes back to that, I think Anika said, live streams don't always work for artists, and it's the same as, like, for me, I have a pet hate about bad music videos, because I always have, you know, here's a great song, and then 2 weeks later, here's a video, and if it's not great, you still expect it to deliver great results, but the video can always, sometimes, I think, have a negative impact if it's not done really well. So this applies into live streams as well. If you're not a live stream band, if you can't pick up 3 or 4 acoustics or some simple instruments and put something good together, then you shouldn't be doing it. But then how do we make something for the artists that can't do that sort of thing? So we try to look at things like, all right, can we do an Instagram takeover that's not a live stream? And what can we do on the Instagram takeover? I mean, we've tried everything from artists interviewing each other. I've seen stuff like where one artist would draw a picture of another artist live on the stream, and then they try and auction it off at the end of the Instagram stream, which these sort of, like, it's a bit more digital marketing ideas than press, but I feel like this is the way that, you know, in terms of what we've been doing, how we've tried to change the way that we've been thinking about releases, that they've been good things to work on.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think that's it. It's digital marketing ideas and building into audiences you wouldn't ordinarily get to build into, and finding ways. And I guess it's looking at your artists and going, okay, what kind of artist do I have, and what is their character points? You know, are they comfortable in front of a camera? Are they quite charming? You know, and can they pull this off as just a personality? Or if they don't have that, what can that look like? I mean, Bastille did. You know, they did watching a film, I think, every week on Twitter. And so they have like film parties every week on Twitter, just to get people engaged, and then talked about it, the film afterwards. So it's like film club instead of book club, because they knew that I guess they loved their films, but they also knew that maybe that it didn't feel right to do anything that was different to that. It kind of lent itself to their personalities. And I think that's it. We have to like be aware of what lends itself to what personality. And Rob, what have you found? I mean, of course you're an agent, and have you considered like doing the live streams, and where's your head at on what you're looking at and how you're trying to like look at how you monetize or do something different in the world they're in at the moment?
So I mean, all things considered, like considering 2020 is probably the bleakest year we're ever going to have in this industry, I'm really excited by it. I think it's going to be great. I've got to touch on the point that, you know, when COVID is finally over, we are still going to be entering into a period of Brexit. Touring is already really expensive, especially for new upcoming artists. It's likely to get even more expensive. So by having something like live streaming, if you geo-target to particular areas that you know you've got a growing fan base, the amount of data that every artist can access now through Spotify, from YouTube, your Facebook, Instagram, you can see where people are growing, where your fan base is moving. So even if you're in London, or if you're in Bristol or Brighton, you want to see how you're going to do up in Scotland or Ireland or Germany, Spain, wherever you want to go, you can geo-target those areas through live streaming. And I think that's going to be an amazing way to just see who is interested in actually seeing this band. You know, if you're going to do small tickets, or if you're going to do it free, then you can start building up from there before you hire a van, hire a tour manager, and plan a trip over there with visas and whatever else is needed. But with that as well, I mean, monetizing it really depends, because I don't think you can monetize pre-recorded streams that go up. I'm noticing that the trend at the moment is that people are willing to spend £5 to £10 for a live performance. But with a live stream, there's a lot of challenges. A lot of things can go wrong. Bad internet connection, not just on the artist side, but for the fan side as well. There's nothing worse than spending £5, £10 and then you're not really able to connect to it, or you keep getting booted out. So you've got to think about that. The majority of my artists that I represent, we've been doing pre-recorded streams because we have a little bit more control there, and a lot of those have been donation based, and which have been good, you know. And
what have you used? What technology have you been using for them?
So we've been doing a bit on Moment House. There's Veeps. It's MyStage, I think one of them's called. Some of them have done TikTok Live, and TikTok is a platform that I've been kind of obsessed with over this transition right now. And then at the moment, I'm also trying to explore something like Sansar with a couple of our more electronic artists, which is like an immersive virtual reality world, because I think that's going to be one of the next steps, like an add-on to live music, is augmented and virtual reality. It's slowly starting to be touched on now. I think there was a couple of artists that recently did an augmented show. And I know Glastonbury, Shangri-La did a virtual reality show in Sansar, which was incredible, if anyone saw it. And I just think it's the next steps of live. It's never going to replace being in a venue surrounded by people watching a band. It's just going to be there to kind of add on to it, so you can extend to a wider audience. And one of the things I do love about streaming, and I think it's not something that a lot of people have really touched on yet, there are some people out there that suffer from heavy anxiety. They don't want to be surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of people in a venue. They might be hospitalized. They might not be able to get into the venue. By opening the streaming world to live music, you're actually accessing a lot more people that didn't feel comfortable going into a venue in the first place. So it's another reach out to maybe an untapped market, which I think is really exciting as well. And it's only gonna help the artist grow even more.
I 100% agree. I think that's exactly what I see it as well, and I see it as, you know, being really smart. Like, you know, one of my guys, he did an Instagram live stream for a charity, and he did 20 minutes, and he made the charity $1.5 grand in like. And they said that was the biggest donation they'd had for all the artists that were playing on this live Instagram stream. And so, you know, I said to him the other day, we could do with getting some money in, so let's do a live stream. So we're now gonna like find a local brewery and make like a beer that will be delivered to the house. So you'll be able to drink beer and have a beer with that will have his face on it, and with the ticket, and do something that actually feels like that is the artistry and what is who he is, but also trying to make a bit of money, because, you know, the reality is that, you know, we have to find different ways forward, you know, and it's you know, it's fine to be like, okay, doesn't really work for that artist, but I think if we keep doing that and it's going to carry on for another year, we're going to be in a situation where, you know, it will never come back. And I think we have to start going, okay, we are working with the realities of we're working with at the moment, and how do we move that forward, and how do we get artists to start seeing that actually digital is going to be there forever now. And I think a lot of the older artists, or some artists that are very live, that's very hard for them to see and to change their mind and go, shit, like actually this is the new way forward. But I think if you really think about it and spend some time and energy on who you are, and if you're creative, like really creative, I think you can do some really interesting things. Has anyone seen any examples that they've really loved, that hasn't been their own or hasn't been part of like their world, that they've gone, oh my God, I wish I'd done that, or you know, I wish I'd thought about that? Is there anything that you want to bring to the table?
Could only really talk about one of my own, to be honest. I mean, I've been largely looking at my own roster rather than other people's, in the sense of like, I guess, the fiduciary duty of like being a manager or being a label manager. So if I can digress from that and talk about a band called Masterkins, I feel they're a really good example of a band that really swallowed the whole tidal wave of this year. I mean, like a lot of other artists, it all seemed, you know, kicked off in March. We're all about to go off to South by Southwest. That's our kickstart to the campaign, our big, you know, we're headlining the BBC Music stage and all of that, and we're setting a trajectory. The guys lost a shitload of money because of that. They lost about 9k. Which to a very working class band from Leeds is, you know, a not insignificant amount. Then there was the lack of monetization, of course, with the absence of a certain live plot, and I think they held on for as long as they could before they had to pull their October tour for various reasons. It really plays nicely into what everyone's been talking about broadly on this call, like the balancing act between quality over quantity, perhaps not doing things just because everyone else is doing it, and trying to pivot that campaign to something that's a bit more relevant to the personalities within that band. And I guess that was ultimately the last thing that we had to sell, and the one thing that I guess could not be cancelled due to COVID. So, you know, and I remember sort of like having several conversations with the band's manager, Rob, and, you know, who, you know, it's always great to have a manager who is very calm under this kind of fire, whilst everyone else feels that the whole room is sort of like set alight. It's quite nice to work with somebody who does have a bit more of an objective sort of like perspective on stuff. So, you know, we were being offered live streams by pretty much every brand under the sun. You know, there was stuff from like Live Nation, we're pretty keen to back them up. There was stuff from like Beavertown. I'm pretty sure everyone got a free pair of Neuro headphones this year due to the brand activation that was due to take place at South by Southwest. But one of the more clever things that I thought they did, which was a little bit of a parody of possibly myself or somebody else at the label, was come up with a fictitious web series about a label executive called Dick Bastard, and their struggle about this fictitious person piling on a lot of pressure due to COVID onto the band to overperform in certain respects. So hammer the pre-sales, hammer the pre-orders, talk to your mum and dad, and actually, those grassroots sort of like marketing sort of things, like it actually led to a chart position for their debut album. And to put that in context, that's where you can land with a healthy indie campaign, is the top 50. But if you look at the charts right now, if you look at radio playlists right now, they're fairly homogenized at this point, and it's been ridiculously difficult to counteract that, ironically, that surge in a new audience that certain DSPs and I guess radio stations are now currently enjoying. And I can see their programming has very much changed to adapt to that newfound audience they have. And there's not been, in my estimation, a great deal of room for a new artist or a developing artist to actually launch. So I think that's actually a really good example of a perseverance story of a band that literally tries everything that they can, and I think can actually walk around with their heads held high. That was a very successful campaign under possibly the harshest circumstances, by just looking at what they have rather than what they might gain by taking certain risks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's about knowing what you have and what you have in your locker, and what you can do with that, and finding ways forward. I mean, my client's going to do it in a studio, probably, in a live stream, because we don't want to be spending money on using anywhere else, and we can, because it's a great space. So it's just going, okay, what have we got in our tools, and how do we find ways forward on doing that? Is there anything else that you guys want to bring to the table that you think could be of value to artists right now, that you think, if I was in a new artist, what bit of advice would you give them? Is there anything out there that you would give them?
I think connecting with the fan base that you've got right now has become really, really vital. And I'm noticing that with any size artist, they're really able to kind of, have that almost one-on-one time with fans, which is really important, because usually outside of this pandemic, you would be on the road rehearsing, trying to get gigs. There'd be so much going on, whether you've got a team or you don't. One example of that is, obviously they're a fairly big band, but Haim, who have put out one of my favorite albums this year, I think, recently did a Zoom conference call with loads of their fans to teach them a dance for the tour next year. Not only are you giving their fans something to excited to look forward to for next year, but they're able to actually jump on a Zoom call, 100 people, and have FaceTime with this amazing artist. And it's little things like that which I think are really, really important. And there doesn't need to be this pressure of you need to be touring and performing right now. Instead, just use the time to maybe connect with the fan base, invest in them a little bit, because they're about to invest their entire lives in you and your career. So give them a bit of time now while you have that opportunity.
It's such a great piece of advice, definitely. I think that's it. And sometimes we don't see fans as actually people, and I think we need to see them as people. And they want to connect, and they want to know about the artist, and they want to be part of it. And I think that's so vital. Is there any other kind of really good bits of advice that you would want to give to people out there, that are artists out there that are kind of in a similar situation to all of us lot?
For me, it's just survive. It's just survive as long as you possibly can. I suppose, I realise that, a purpose of this panel is to give a more sort of positive flavour to what's been inherently a negative situation. But I'm going around advising people that music can actually wait if it comes down to it. For me, the priority is to make sure that people can economically stretch into next year, when perhaps we can have the disposable income to take risks on things like music. The other bit of advice is, if you are struggling financially, just a reminder that AIM are running a crisis fund, and it's open to a lot of people. So please do check if you're eligible, and get in touch if you do want to apply for it.
Cool. Anika, what were you going to say there?
I was just going to say a similar thing, really, is just take care of yourself. Like, it's so easy to get lost in, I'm an artist, I need to have my art out there, but also so many people have lost so much through this time, and the mental health effects of that on the individual are so heavy. And first and foremost, it should just be about looking after yourself and finding support where you can find support, and finding community where you can find community, is what I would say.
It's hugely important. I mean, I've got a therapist, and I think, you know, it was the best thing that I ever did. And most of my clients have therapists now. And I think, it's making sure that you have the time to sort your head out and make sure your head's clear, because I think there's a lot of trauma out there at the moment because of what's going on, and making sure that you can kind of navigate all of that, really. So yeah, I think, you know, it's okay to not be okay. I think that's vital to say. Is there any other kind of little business tidbits that we could kind of put out there that you might? I really like the BC Camplight Patron idea as well. Of, I don't know if that's been possible on is it worked? Do you know if that's worked, Anika?
I have to say I don't work on BC Camplight, so I haven't been following too closely how that's. You probably know better than I do how well that worked.
Yeah, it seems like people have been really engaged with it and really excited by it, and kind of appreciated being part of something with him. And he's kind of like he's just basically monetised his streams, but in a way that is £5 a month, and you get access to all of his inside bits, I guess. I don't know if that's working on a monetary level, but it's certainly from what I can see, people have been engaging with it and really enjoying that. So
he's an artist that has a very strong voice, and he already has a community around him. So I think he is the sort of artist that lends himself quite well to that sort of campaign. It seems like it would work well.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it. It's kind of like just going, okay, well, where do we have, you know, strengths, and working through from there. I mean, from a new artist point of view, what is everyone doing in regards to like the first EPs and the first few tracks that you're putting out there? Is there anything that you've done differently that you would have done previously?
On my side, the advice I've been given to some of the clients and working with the managers and label teams is, you know, just be careful and plan. What I think we could see is the start of 2021 is just an overhaul of new releases, new albums, and all coming out in a very, very short amount of time. There's only so much that, you know, the general public can take of new releases, and how much radio can play and how much press can put out there. So I think it's just like plan accordingly. This year is a great year to do releases because you can take some time and focus on it, I think, and we're seeing some really heavy, like really strong success with it. But planning right now and just doing those careful steps. Don't over release because you feel like you have to be doing something, but also just make sure it's properly planned.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial. Properly planning anything is vital, and don't feel like you need to run when you could just walk through things and make sure you're making the right decisions. And, you know, and also remember, there's still radio out there, and there's still press out there, and, you know, and you can still get audience, and you can still build audiences. It's also using Twitter for what it is, and using Facebook for what it is, which is basically a community builder, you know, instead of just using it as like a TV and going, this is what I'm doing, make it a lot more conversational. I think what Sean Adams, who runs Six Music, does really well is keep it as a community, and is always asking questions of the community, and open them questions out to people, and make it more kind of family building. I think that's hugely important right now. I've got 1 more minute to go, so is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
Hang in there.
I think overall, you know, I think that the keys from my point of view is just look at what you are as an artist is, and where your strengths are, and work to them strengths, and really push them strengths as much as you can, and don't be scared of putting your head down and thinking about these things, and not you know, and not rush into it. You don't have to rush in, but also look after your mind, because, you know, that's hugely important as well, because it's a rough ride right now as well. So, okay, great. Well, I want to thank you all. I want to thank all 5 of our great panelists today, and thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.